Hello everybody, it's me again, Bert, with the PBIS Applications Training Team. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the last graph in the SWIS Equity Report, the Outcomes by Group graph. This is one of two composition graphs in the Equity Report. In the Outcomes by Group graph, we're comparing two things for every subgroup: the group's percentage of the total school enrollment and its percentage of the total number of outcomes in the school. With this graph, teams look to answer the question, is the student group's percentage of a given outcome equal or reasonably proportionate to their percentage of the school's total enrollment? Let's take a look at the graph where it might be easier to understand. For each group, there are two bars, a green one and a blue one. The green bar represents the group's percentage of the total school enrollment. In this example, it looks like about 60% of our students identify as white, 20% identify as Hispanic Latinx, and 13% identify as black, and so on. Next to each green bar is a blue bar, which represents that group's percentage of the total number of outcomes. In this example, we selected all referrals as our outcome. So each blue bar shows us that group's percentage of all the referrals written at this school. When we look at the data table, we see students who identify as white account for 347 referrals of the 656 referrals written at the school. To calculate the percentage, we take the 347 referrals and divide it by 656, which is about 52.90%. Or we can say students who identify as white account for about 53% of all the referrals written at our demo school. On the graph again, SWIS rounds those percentages off. The graph shows us about 53% of all referrals were given to students who identify as white. 24% were given to students who identify as Hispanic Latinx, and about 21% of all the referrals were given to students who identify as black. The critical question we want to think about when comparing the percentage of the total enrollment to the percentage of all the referrals written is whether each group receives a proportionate share of referrals. Students who identify as white are about 60% of the total enrollment, so we would expect them to receive about 60% of the referrals written in our school. In this example, this group of students receives about 53% of the school's referrals, which is significantly less than their proportionate share. And when we look at our students who identify as Hispanic Latinx and students who identify as black, comparing the green and the blue bars, we see both groups receive more than their share of referrals compared to their percentage of the school's total enrollment. Students who identify as black make up 13% of our student enrollment and receive 21% of the referrals written. This is a red flag. The same is true for our students who identify as Hispanic Latinx. In this, the Outcomes by Group graph, we see the group accounts for 20% of the total school student enrollment and 24% of the referrals written. And when we look at the previous graph, the students with Outcomes by Group, we recall that students who identify as Hispanic Latinx accounted for 21% of the group of students who had at least one referral. That means while our students who identify as Hispanic Latinx have an almost proportionate share of the students with referrals, because this 24% is larger than that 21%, our Hispanic Latinx must be receiving more multiple referrals. They seem to have a higher likelihood of having been referred more than one time. At this point, we've made our way through every graph in the equity report and clearly noticed some disproportionate outcomes for certain student groups. It's time to put together what we've learned and work toward defining problems with more precision. If you're ready to tackle that, join me in our next video, the SWIS Equity Report and Drill Down Analysis.